Now we are going to talk about one of the most important cardiac surgeons in the world. And to speak the truth, he is the first cardiac surgeon or cardiothoracic surgeon who transplanted human heart from one body to another body. And he is none other than Dr. Christiaan Barnard of South Africa. You know, South Africa is a country where Nelson Mandela was born. South Africa is a country where there was apartheid or racial discrimination or race discrimination between black and white people. South Africa is a country where there was apartheid, a government policy, which the government of South Africa imposed on the people of South Africa as a public law. It is South Africa where Nelson Mandela had to fought against the black domination, against the white domination, against the black discrimination. It is South Africa where Nelson Mandela had to live in the jail for long 27 years and 6 months, or in the language of Nelson Mandela, he had to pass in jails for long 10,000 days. So today we are going to talk about a country, about a person who was born in a country which was plagued by racial discrimination, but he was also born in a country where there was gold mine and diamond mine. He was also born in a country where there was Nadim Gardimar, another Nobel laureate for literature. So, without wasting our time, we'd like to focus on Dr. Christiaan Barnard, who was the first transplant cardiac surgeon who transplanted one heart from one human beings to another human beings. This is Dr. Christiaan Neethling Barnard. This doctor was born on 8 November 1922 and he died on September 2 in 2001. He was a South African cardiac surgeon. He performed the world's first human to human heart transplant operation. On 3 December 1967, Barnard transplanted the heart of accident victim Denise Darvall into the chest of 54-year-old Louis Washkansky, who regained full consciousness and was able to talk easily with his wife before dying 18 days later of pneumonia, largely brought on by the anti-rejection drugs that suppressed his immune system. Barnard had told Mr. and Mrs. Washkansky that the operation had an 80% chance of success, an assessment which has been criticized as misleading. Barnard's second transplant patient, Philip Blaiberg, whose operation was performed at the beginning of 1968, returned home from the hospital and lived for a year and a half. It's a great success on the part of Dr. Christiaan Barnard. Mr. Barnard was born in Woifort West, Cape Province. Barnard studied medicine and he practiced for several years in his native South Africa. As a young doctor experimenting on dogs, Barnard developed a remedy for the infant defect of intestinal atresia. His technique saved the lives of 10 babies in Cape Town and was adopted by surgeons in Britain and the United States. In 1955, he traveled to the United States and was initially assigned further gastrointestinal work by Owen Hardin Wagenstein at the University of Minnesota. He was introduced to the heart-lung machine, and Dr. Barnard was allowed to transfer to the service run by open heart surgery pioneer Walt Lillehei. Upon returning to South Africa in 1958, Barnard was appointed head of the Department of Experimental Surgery at the Groote Schuur Hospital, Cape Town. He retired as head of the Department of Cardiothoracic Surgery in Cape Town in 1983 after rheumatoid arthritis in his hands ended his surgical career. He became interested in anti-aging research, and in 1986 his reputation suffered when he promoted Glycil, an expensive anti-aging skin cream whose approval was withdrawn by the United States Food and Drug Administration soon thereafter. During his remaining years, he established the Christiaan Barnard Foundation, dedicated to helping underprivileged children throughout the world. He died in 2001 at the age of 78 after an asthma attack. He was basically a cardiothoracic surgeon, but he is still well known for first human to human heart transplantation. Now we will talk about how he did the first human to human heart transplant in this video. Dr. Christiaan Barnard performed the world's first human to human heart transplant operation in the early morning hours of Sunday, 3 December 1967. Louis Washkansky, a 54-year-old grocer who was suffering from diabetes and incurable heart disease, was the patient. Barnard was assisted by his brother Maurice Barnard, as well as a team of 30 staff members. The operation lasted approximately 5 hours. Barnard stated to Washkansky and his wife Anne Washkansky that the transplant had an 80% chance of success. This has been criticized by the ethicists Peter Singer and Helga Cushy as making claims for chances of success to the patient and family which were unfounded and misleading. Barnard later wrote, "For a dying man, it is not a difficult decision because he knows he is at the end. If a lion chases you to the bank of a river filled with crocodiles, you will leap into the water, convinced you have a chance to swim to the other side." The donor heart came from a young woman, Denise Darvall, who had been rendered brain dead in an accident on 2 December in 1967 while crossing a street in Cape Town. On examination at Groote Schuur Hospital, Darvall had two serious fractures in her skull with no electrical activity in her brain detected and no sign of pain when ice water was poured into her ear. Code Venter and Bertie Bosman requested permission from Darvall's father for Denise's heart to be used in the transplant attempt. The afternoon before his first transplant, Barnard dozed at his home while listening to music. When he awoke, he decided to modify some way and lowers technique. Instead of cutting straight across the back of the atrial chambers of the donor heart, he would avoid damage to the septum and instead cut two small holes for the vena cava and pulmonary veins prior to the transplant rather than wait for Darvall's heart to stop beating at his brother. At his brother Maurice Barnard's urging, Christiaan had injected potassium into her heart to paralyze it and render her technically dead by the whole body standard. 20 years later, Maurice Barnard recounted, Christ stood there for a few moments watching, then stood back and said, "It works." Washkansky survived the operation and lived for 18 days. He died from pneumonia, possibly due to the immunosuppressive drugs he was taking. So, the first patient, Dr. Christiaan Barnard operated, survived for 18 days. 18 days is not a very long time. 18 days is not a year. 18 days is not an age. 18 days is not a century, but this only 18 days is as a great milestone in the medical history, in the history of first human to human heart transplant. And it is Dr. Christiaan Barnard who translated this dream of transplanting a human heart from one human being to another human being, and he made it a success, and thus it works. So everyone in the world is still pays tribute to Dr. Christiaan Barnard, and we all consider him to be the father of modern cardiothoracic surgery or heart transplantation. Besides this, Dr. Christiaan Barnard also had some other heart transplants, and they had been successful. With several years, someone have survived. And this great man, Dr. Christiaan Barnard, was not given the Nobel Peace Prize or Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. And on some occasion in a public life, he said that. But one thing we have to remember that Dr. Christiaan Barnard was an outspoken opponent of South Africa's laws of apartheid. At the beginning of my video, I told that Dr. Christiaan was born in a country where there was apartheid. He was born in South Africa where there was government law of racial discrimination, racial segregation. It was South Africa where Dr. Christiaan Barnard, and it was South Africa where the apartheid was prevailing, whites were dominating the blacks, and this is South Africa where Nelson Mandela had to live in the jail for protesting against this inhuman practice, inhuman government laws called apartheid. So in case of apartheid, Dr. Christiaan Barnard was an outspoken opponent of South Africa's laws of apartheid and was not afraid to criticize his nation's government. Although Dr. Christiaan Barnard himself is a white, although he had to temper his remarks to some extent to travel abroad. Rather than leaving his homeland, he used his fame to campaign for a change in the law. Christian's brother Mauritius Barnard went into politics and was elected to the legislature from the Progressive Federal Party. Barnard later stated that the reason he won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was probably because he was a white South African. Because the white in South Africa were the suppressors, were the oppressors. Maybe this is the reason why Dr. Christiaan Barnard, in spite of doing something great, something miracle, he was not given the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. However, shortly before his visit into Kenya in 1978, the following was written about his views regarding race relations in South Africa. While he believes in the participation of Africans in the political process of South Africa, he is opposed to a one man, one vote system in South Africa. In answering a hypothetical question on how he would solve the race problem, were he a benevolent dictator in South Africa, Barnard stated the following in a long interview at the Weekly Review. While I would abolish social discrimination, political discrimination would continue. He favored the total division of the country along racial lines. His words were, I somehow feel, but we may have to divide South Africa into two equal divisions. In a follow-up questions about where the colored people would end up in that scenario, he replied that I would include them in the white South Africa. That colored people always have been accepted among whites. That the black man will not accept this view of universal suffrage. That we are still out of the games despite the fact that in the field of sports where we have virtually integrated completely. Regarding the Soweto uprising, he claimed there was a lot of external stirring up of turbulence. regarding the anger from the black population when Steve Biko was murdered. He said that I think that something like $50,000 came in from outside to work up feelings at the funeral. He stated that the National Party members were as upset about Biko's murder as were blacks. The white community was thoroughly upset. Let me tell you, the nationalists themselves were very upset. The interview ended with the following summary from himself. I often say that, like King Lear, South Africa is a country more sinned against than sinning. King Lear, I would like to remind you here that King Lear is one of the greatest dramas, greatest tragedies, where King Lear had to divide his kingdom equally among his three dearest daughters, but out of the age, because of being overaged, he could not do it, and he had to suffer for it. So that's why maybe Dr. Christiaan Barnard said that, like King Lear, South Africa is a country more sinned than against than sinning. King Lear, when was left abandoned, when he was left depressed, when he was abandoned by his two daughters, King Lear said that I am more sinned against than sinning. So this is simply all about the great man who first transplanted from first human to human heart transplant, who did it, who made it a success. Now, I don't like to elongate my video. I'd like to put an end to my video here. I'd like to tell you about the death of Dr. Christiaan Barnard. Dr. Christiaan Barnard died on 2 September 2001. This is 2024, and today is 25 September, almost 23 days ago. Dr. Christiaan Barnard died while on holiday in Pahos, Cyprus. Early reports stated that he had died of a heart attack, but an autopsy showed his death was caused by a severe asthma attack. So, lastly, but not least, one thing that we have to stress, we have to put an emphasis on is that the man who made a dead man into alive, who made a live man into dead by doing the first human to human heart transplant, he himself is now dead, because you cannot have any escape from death. Nobody is above death. We have no escape from death. We have to die. But before our death, we have to lead a very peaceful, very energetic, very active life. And for doing this, we must have to follow some rules of health. We have to have a sound sleep from 7 to 9 hours in the 24 hours, and we have to regular physical exercise, and we have to take nutritious, balanced diet regularly. Only then, today or tomorrow, everyone will have to face death either of heart attack or of severe asthma attack, like Dr. Christiaan Barnard. But we will live a peaceful, energetic, and innovative life. So thank you for listening, for carefully listening to this video. And once again, I'd like to say goodbye to you and bye-bye for watching this video. Thank you. Bye-bye.